Bună seara! Mă bucur să vă pot prezenta în această seară un eveniment dublu. E vorba de o lansare de carte dublă, două volume semnate de Cristina Bejan. Și pentru a începe să facem acest lucru, aș vrea să fac așa pe scurt prezentările. Sunt Camelia Crăciun, sunt istoric literar, sunt conferențiar universitar la Facultatea de Limbi Străine a Universității București. Și împreună cu prietena și colega mea, Ruxandra Pop, antropolog, poetă, dramaturg, omul din spatele Hydra Society, o să prezentăm cele două volume de care vă spuneam. Este vorba de o monografie despre intelectualii din perioada interbelică din România și legătura lor cu mișcările de extremă dreaptă, deci cu Garda de Fier. Și apoi este o lucrare, un volum de poezie, o perspectivă foarte personală a Cristinei Bejan asupra relației ei cu România, cu traumele istoriei, cu traumele personale în general și cu perspectiva unei moșteniri istorice a rădăcinilor românești. Câteva cuvinte despre Cristina, autoarea noastră din această seară. E vorba, așa cum vă spuneam, de un scriitor româno-american. Cristina este născută în Statele Unite, dar vine dintr-o familie mixtă și toată viața și-a petrecut-o cumva între cele două culturi. E absolventă a Northwestern University cu o specializare în filozofie și teatru. Apoi a făcut un masterat și un doctorat la Universitatea din Oxford și s-a ocupat de istoria României, de istoria interbelică a intelectualilor români și de relația lor cu politicul. De fapt, volumul din această seară este chiar despre acest lucru, mă iertați. Este lucrarea ei de doctorat care în sfârșit a fost publicată la prestigioasa editură Palgrave, iar al doilea volum, Green Horses on the Walls, nu trebuie să mai traduc, nu-i așa, versiunea engleză a unei populare expresii românești, cai verzi pe pereți. Acum facem un pod peste ocean și prezint și eu copia mea. Acest volum de poezie, deși este scris în limba engleză cu multe inserții românești, e de fapt despre România, despre relația Cristinei cu România și despre experiența ei româno-americană în tot acest timp. Înainte să trecem la eveniment propriu-zis, aș vrea să vă spun că, având în vedere originile culturale ale autoarei noastre și faptul că, în mod evident, vom avea public de ambele părți ale oceanului, ne-am hotărât că această prezentare ar fi potrivit să se facă în ambele limbi, mai cu precădere în engleză, pentru că știu că e o limbă pe care majoritatea publicului nostru o va înțelege și sper să nu vă deranjeze trecerile noastre din română în engleză și invers. Așa că, just a quick presentation also in English. So, good evening. I'm really happy to introduce our event tonight, the double book launch. It's an event which presents two books of Cristina Bejan, a historical monograph and a poetry volume, which we are really happy to present here on Cărturești Bookshop Facebook page. It's my pleasure to do that. I am Camelia Crăciun. I'm a literary historian and I'm teaching at the University of Bucharest. And together with my colleague and friend Ruxandra Pop, anthropologist and author and playwright as well, we're going to introduce two books which are very fascinating for us, at least, and I'm sure are going to be for many others, given the range of the readership that they are going to cover. It's a monograph written by Cristina Bejan on Romanian intellectual history, more specifically on the Romanian intellectuals during interwar period and their connection to fascism, intellectuals and fascism in interwar Romania, the Criterion Association, and it's published by Palgrave. And on the other hand, we have the more emotional and sensitive side of Cristina, due to her poetry volume, Green Horses on the Walls, a book mostly about Romania and about her personal experience as living between two languages and two cultures all the time, coming from a Romanian American background. Sorry. So before moving on to our Romanian English, mostly English event tonight, Cristina, tell us a few words about you. I mean, I would say a lot of you about you, but I think it would be nice to tell us more about your work.
Mulțumesc frumos, Camelia. Și Rux. Și mersi, Cotăreș, pentru invitație. Este o onoare enormă pentru mine să fiu aici cu voi. To be honest, I prepared something in Romanian, but Camelia said it all already.
Sorry.
No, it's great. I mean, I'm not going to repeat what you shared. You know, we talked about how my father's from Romania. I'm half Romanian, bicultural background, going back and forth. You know, the story of so many in the Romanian diaspora or any diaspora. You know, we live in a globalized world. We live in a world of migration. And so I'm a product of that. So I guess what I would like to share before really we start, you know, I learned Romanian as an adult. So, and this is because my father fled Romania in 1969, very difficult circumstances. I'm going to read one of my poems about that. And growing up in the 80s in North Carolina, my parents never thought that communism was going to fall. So it was, we never, for him, what's the point of anything Romanian, right? We're never going to go there. We didn't know my family there. And so that's why we weren't raised speaking. And then, of course, after 1989, Romania and Romanians came flooding into our life. We're spending every summer there. My father brought so many students to Durham. And it then began this exchange. So it was really when I hit 18 that I said, I want to learn Romanian. And it was really, so bits and pieces of studying the language. I did an independent study with Professor Stella Radulescu, who many know in our diaspora as a very famous poet. She got me into Eliade. That's how I started reading him. But it was really living in Bucharest as a Fulbright scholar with you guys that I started really, really speaking Romanian. So at that point, I could read no problem, would understand no problem. But then it was 2007 that I was speaking Romanian as easy as English. And sadly, I'm not speaking so fluently, you know, these 13 years later, but it's still the language of my soul and the language of my spirit, which is why I write my poetry in Romanian, English, and French. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Cristina. Now I'd like to move back a little bit to the monograph, which is the book which fascinated me since you started working on it. Actually, the topic is highly sensitive still, not as much as maybe 3 decades ago, but to talk about the connection between the Interro-Romanian intellectuals and politics, especially their attraction to the extreme right and to the Iron Guard, was for a long period a very difficult topic to approach. Basically because during communist regime, like for more than 4 decades, the topic was basically silenced due to the situation of these intellectuals after 1945. You wrote extensively about them in your book. Some of them managed to escape to the West and to continue with great careers there. And some of them stayed in Romania, and in the best situation, they were marginalized, and in the worst, they actually victims of communist prisons and died there, like Vulcanescu and so many others. So for a lot of time, their books and their contribution to Romanian culture was basically unknown to the general public. And after 1989, when their contribution and their writings and their activity started to be again reintroduced in the public debate, a strange, or maybe not so strange, because maybe this is the trajectory that was probably common to other historical memories in other countries, especially Eastern European communist countries. The debate emerged passionately and violently and very personal, and it focused not so much on the scholarship side, on the more balanced and objective and professional approach on the topic, but it took more a personal and emotional perspective of the intellectuals who were on the scene in the 90s and maybe early 2000. And this debate said more about us, those who were then, than about the intellectuals during the interwar period themselves. So for almost 2 decades, this debate continued in this tone, but step by step, it started to normalize, to come closer to a normal discourse, a dispassionate one, a more based on resources and on the archives, which gradually opened up for research. So we kind of are able now to have a natural discussion about it and to acknowledge what happened and how this happened. Why was it so sensitive, and why did it take so long for things to move to the right direction in this area of debate? I'm talking about famous intellectuals, probably the best known intellectuals that Romanian culture produced, and most of them being well known abroad. So in a sense, I can understand that in the 90s, this might have seemed a destruction of the cultural canon, which was promoted then, which in a sense is still functioning even now. But now at least we are able to make a difference between professional careers and personal options, political affiliations. And it doesn't mean that an incredible philosopher is still a philosopher, a valuable contribution, but at the same time can make huge mistakes in his personal life. So we're talking about Eliade, we're talking about Cioran, we're talking about Noica, we're talking also about Sebastian or Eugen Ionescu, but they are kind of out of discussion because their connection to the extreme right was non-existent, especially because of their personal history and cultural heritage and Jewish origin. But I think this was mainly the reason which caused this kind of very difficult way of discussing openly until very recently this topic. Of course, the debate is not new. It started in mid-90s with the publication of Sebastian's diary, actually even before, because the diary was quite well-known abroad, but not published in Romania. And from then on, with all these debates, which eventually were published into volumes like Dosarul Sebastian and Sebastian sub vrem, to further on books of Leon Volovici, Matei Călinescu, Alexander Laniel Avastin, which sparked another controversy later on, myself included, and many others, because somehow everybody working on interwar period felt the obligation actually to take a position, hopefully a professional and not a personal one. And now we're getting finally to Cristina's work, which I find really important because to me, knowing the topic quite closely for the last 20 years, it's really interesting because her approach is dedicated to a criterion group. I mean, we're talking about the same group of people, but basically everybody talked about them in general, about their activity on the whole period of their Romanian experience, while the criterion experience as such, in terms of association, publication, series of events, was not exactly research in depth as Cristina does in her book. For me, was a wonderful surprise to find new resources which Cristina found in Romanian archives and to put them in a great light and to put them to good use in her book. And I really enjoyed reading her new approach, and I think is going to be maybe again to start this discussion, which we hoped we put to rest in the last years. To be honest, I've met Cristina 15 years ago in Oxford. We were working on our PhDs, both of us, and our topics was kind of complementing each other because I was working on interwar period Jewish intellectuals writing in Romanian. Cristina was also working on Sebastian, for example, and she was working on the larger group of intellectuals in that period. And it was wonderful to watch each other evolve on this, on our research, and to cross paths in different projects and conferences. And now I'm so happy that the book is finally published at Palgrave. And to be honest, I haven't been as happy since my book publication last year. So we've made it. And in the end, I just hope that a Romanian publishing house is going to translate it as soon as possible, because it's a wonderful addition to our national discussion about intellectuals. And Cristina, I'm really happy to talk about the book tonight. And although we talked many times about everything we can imagine possible, I still have some questions I'd like to address. And if you want to talk a little bit and to introduce the public in a more, I don't know, personal note, now, can I ask you some things which I haven't asked you before? So reading the book, I was thinking of putting together your both two volumes. Obviously, the communist period is much closer to you through the personal and family heritage. In a way, this inherited trauma that communists left in the families of so many of us. So how come that you focused on the interwar period? How did you end up with this topic, which is really interesting for us, but I would have expected you to work more on the communist Romania than on the interwar period?
So it actually finds its root in my family history. So when we were growing up, I have a sister who's 2 years younger, and my father would put us to bed every night with bedtime stories about Romania. So it kind of, we were raised with a sort of magical Neverland view of where we're originally from, where our dad is from. And so we knew from those stories that Romania was free before communism, you know, in a sense, right? But that it was at least democratic like the United States. And so I always had this question for my dad, well, then if it was, what happened, right? Why did democracy fail? And so when I was in college, I mean, Northwestern, I could go on and on about how Northwestern's the best school in the universe, but it's magical there as well because you can study everything. It's the kind of school, it's got arts, it's got liberal arts, it's got science. And so I was able to be a philosophy major. I went for theater. My path was to be a Shakespearean actress, actually. That was at 18, that was my plan. And I stumbled into a philosophy class and ended up writing an honors thesis on democratization in post-1989 Romania. This question of democracy, why is it so hard to democratize coming out of the Soviet experience? And that, again, took me back when I was so fortunate to go to graduate school. I was saying, well, I want to work on something similar. So how about let's look at when Romania failed at democracy, the interwar period. So it was out of that, looking at from the political angle. And I mentioned Professor Radulescu at Northwestern, that I was reading Eliade with her in an effort to learn Romanian and study Romanian literature. In addition to that, I was in Paris in graduate school in a bookshop with my family and stumbled across the notorious Alexandra Lagnel-Lavastine, L'Oubli du Fascisme, and I bought it. French is a language I've known from a very early age. And so that's where it all began, honestly.
That's it's very interesting. I never knew the story of how did you end up with the topic. I don't know. I have many questions to ask you, but we also have a Q&A small part in the end. Can I continue asking you something else?
Yeah. How about ask a question and then I'll combine the Q&A.
Okay. Honestly, working in archives, especially in Romania, it's a challenge. And also working for, we know, also working for a topic in history, usually people use also like oral history. Do you have any, I don't know, personal experiences that you want to share with us? Maybe some special moments that you found something really extraordinary in the archive, or you found someone instrumental for your book and you maybe interviewed them, or I don't know, your research actually. How did it work in Romania?
Oh, Camelia, so many moments. Actually, I was cleaning out my computer recently and came across my folder of all of the interviews I conducted, including Volovich, your mentor, and all of these kind individuals, Marta Petreu, Vladimir Tismanianu, who were so giving to talk to me. Because, at this moment, basically an American wandering around Romania asking people to talk to me. So, and obviously I spent time with Vladimir in DC. I spent a summer interviewing people in DC at that point. But the most magical moment is when I discovered Criterion. Of course, I knew about it from reading, doing my research, I already had my topic, but Keith Hitchens, the legendary, I met him at a conference and he said, "Oh, you're working on the young generation. Well, Petru Cormănescu's personal archive is in the library of the Romanian Academy." And of course, I did not know that at that time, because at that time I didn't know much. And so when I won the Fulbright and moved to Bucharest, my first stop was the library of the Romanian Academy, Petru Cormănescu's personal archive. And there I found the gold mine of everything about the Criterion Association. Absolutely everything, from minutes from meetings to postcards that they were handing out to get people to come to their events, to newspaper article clippings about the events, to membership lists and invitations to become a member. Anything you can imagine, it was there. And it was in that moment that I said, I'm writing the biography of the association. So
that's great. We all would like to have this kind of encounters.
Yes.
And one more question. In time, working so many years on such a topic, we develop kind of personal, relationship with our actors, like the main characters in our research. Like some of them are more likable, some of them not so much. Which is your favorite Criterion member? I don't know, Criterionist? How could I say that in English?
Yeah, Criterionist. Hands down, so super easy, Petru Cormănescu. He is my soulmate.
Because he's very homo americanus. He's in a very open state of admiration for the states also.
Yeah, everything about him. From his pro-democracy attitude to also studying philosophy to it's funny, before I was lucky enough to meet my very special partner, I always joked that Petru Cormănescu was, because I spent so much time with him. So it's all those things, but I think ultimately it's the fact that he was a cultural innovator. And one of the quotes about the collapse of Criterion, I think Eliade wrote this in his autobiography, but he says, Petru Cormănescu, the cultural innovator who no longer had anything left to innovate, right? And so he was I mean, he was just, it was like an octopus, all the things, all the cultural and artistic and political things that he was pulling in and putting together and manifesting. And it really is, Communism is my inspiration as I continue to carry the torch of Bucharest Inside the Beltway that Ruxandra and I founded 7 years ago, this cultural platform. And every day I'm inspired by what he accomplished. And I should also say one final thing, because we should talk about these things. He is an LGBTQ plus icon of Romania that should be celebrated and talked about. And he inspires me in that way as well.
That's wonderful. Why do you think, my last question for now, because then I'm going to pass the floor to Ruxandra. Why do you think, I mean, I get those questions all the time. Why do you think people should read about these stories? Why the audience should be interested in what we're doing? Or who do you think would be interested in what we are actually writing about?
Well, my most favorite assignment that I give my students, because just like you, I'm an educator.
Actually, yeah, we forgot to say that you're actually a professor at Metropolitan University in Denver, Colorado. That's really important. We focused on what you're actually doing, not on the professional position now. But sorry, yeah.
Thank you. Well, you know me, I could care less about professional position. But what I do care about is the fact that I have my students write oral histories, and I ask them to find someone in their family or their community, a senior to them, that they can ask questions about their lives. And I think this is why history is so important, because originally it started as storytelling, right? Before anybody was writing anything down. History is stories of humans. That's what it is. And so why should we study these particular humans? Well, they had some really interesting stories, and the lives that they lived have repercussions for our lives today. So, you know, I'm sure this is the cliche for every history teacher, but, you know, the whole you need to learn from the past to understand the present to prevent the negative in the future. Well, I 100% believe that. I worked at the Holocaust Museum and Research for 4 years. I believe that we need to learn about the crimes of the past in order to prevent them in the future. So this story in particular, so obviously I'm inspired by the cultural activity of Criterion, but the political angle, why I went down this road in the first place, we don't have to look far to see neo-fascism and the rise of the extreme right globally in 2020. We don't have to look far. I'm not going to list all of them, but in a handful, we have Brazil, India, the United States. Obviously, we have countries in Western Europe. So, and if you look at extremism that's not far right, well, People's Republic of China.
Sure. Yeah.
So, in Belarus, what's happening right now. So yeah, to understand what is happening in these places right now, it couldn't be more valuable than to understand similar activity in the past.
Thank you, Cristina. And now I think we should also talk about the poetry volume. So Ruxandra, please take the floor.
Yourself. I have to say that I'm very happy and a little bit emotional about being here tonight in this company and being able to celebrate with Camelia Cristina's success with the 2 books she has published last year. It feels a little bit like Clubul Tocilarelor, but I hope that it's Clubul Tocilarelor Simpatice. And it's my pleasure to talk a bit about Cristina's book, but I have to be honest and tell you that we decided that it's much better to hear poetry than to talk about poetry. So most of our intervention about green horses on the wall is gonna be performative rather than just a discussion. I'm just gonna say that I've met Cristina in 2008 when we were organizing with Hydra Society a series of events at the Museo Café. It was a very beautiful coffee shop inside the Muzeul de Geologie on Kiselev. And Cristina came with her beautiful blonde hair that has a life of its own. And she had this play, which is called Columba Calling. It was about her previous experience in Vanuatu. Am I right, Cristina?
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. And she wanted to do a lecture. And at that time, we were organizing events there. We were organizing readings, poetry readings, and I also was in a time when I started to experience with theater, and we clicked right away. And we started discovering that we have many things in common. One of them being poetry, the one that is bringing us together today. The other one being theater. The other one being an interest on research because, Cristina has been researching the life of Petru Comarnescu. I have been researching as a PhD student the life of Mihai Pop, another interwar intellectual born in the same year as Comarnescu that comes with a different perspective. And of course, I shouldn't forget to mention another common passion that is not obvious today, but I tell you it exists, our passion for red lipstick. And I'm telling this because I think that Cristina in her writings never puts aside her feminine part. And this beautiful book here, I think it can be easily read as a feminist manifesto. It's a book that tackles very, very, very delicate issues, like being an immigrant and being part of a tricky diaspora. And by the way, Cristina, you will have the chance to hear Cristina's poem called A Tricky Diaspora. She is dealing in her poetry with mental health issue and sexual assault, and always having to put up living with the pressure of fulfilling to-do lists and handling deadlines, and being in the same time a poet and a researcher and an educator, and she does it in a way that is both intellectual but also heartfelt. I would describe this book as being honest. Another word that describes this book is resilience and sensibility. Is this the word sensibilitate? Is this a false friend, or how is it in English?
I would say sensitive.
Sensitive, yeah. And yeah, I'm not gonna say more, just that I have found myself in each and every page of this book, and that it's also a book that reminds me that I should be more instead of doing more. And I think that the role of a poetry book is reminding you of yourself, and you did great, Cristina. And now what we're suggesting is a beautiful lineup of 5 poems, 4 of them written by Cristina, starting with Green Horses on the Wall, then opening an orange envelope, The third one would be A Tricky Diaspora that I already mentioned, and I love that poem. And the fourth one would be a poem about Bucharest. And this poem will actually open a poetic dialogue because I'm also going to be reading part of a poem called Random America, a touristic poet guide, a poetic tourist guide, sorry, that I wrote when I was as a Fulbright scholar. And we decided to have this dialogue, not only because Cristina has always been a very generous friend and always celebrating others people's talent and passions, but because I think that one of the biggest gifts that we got as Fulbright scholars was to go and experience a completely different culture with very fresh eyes that made us love that place in a way that the people from that very culture wouldn't be able to do it because they lost their sense of wonder. And this being said, I'm inviting Cristina to show us her poems.
My goodness, I'm blown away. I'm so grateful, Rooks, and so grateful, Camellia. So two of these are, well, first of all, I need to say incredibly briefly, I am a spoken word poet. I am not a, you know, only like volumes and volumes of journals scribbling away in my basement poet. I write for the stage. So that's important because I think if you're approaching my poetry book thinking it's just going to be, you know, poems about flowers and all sorts of lovely things, it won't be. It's about hard topics. I was trained on the spoken word stages of Washington, D.C., where I performed for 10 years, and my stage name is Lady Godiva. So without further ado, Green Horses on the Walls. And I'm having this handy just because I'm a little nervous because this is one of the biggest stages I've ever performed on. So here we go. Green Horses on the Walls. Kai vezi pe pereți. Asta a fost la început în mintea mea. Visele mele n-au fost posibile. Am fost nebună, bătută în cap. Cristina, fii serioasă. Cristina, vrei doar ca vezi pe pereți. Green Horses on the Walls. The Romanian expression for having delusions. From the start, I was told that my dreams weren't possible, that I was crazy, that I needed to be serious, that theater was a hobby, that I was always merely chasing the green horses and it was time to grow up because they didn't exist. But I know my need to write exists. I know that the open page is a reservoir for my joy and pain. I know that the sweat-stained floors of an empty theater welcome me. I also know that my dimensions cannot be confined to a DCCV, a list of degrees and honors. Now perhaps those don't truly exist. Can they capture a beating heart, prayers, kindness, caring for our elders and children? Or the next play that is on the tip of my pen and igniting my mind with excitement? The straight-jacketed list to DC Impress is what confines and lies. My truth is displayed on the open canvas of my art. My truth runs with the green horses through the fields, down Rockville Pike, and all the way to the heart of DC 14th Street. I hear them calling, Cristina, hi a casa, calling me home. As I walk today through a canopy of trees, I cross paths with a butterfly, and I came home to write this poem. And neither were or are delusions. Kai vezi pe pereți, adorat 34 de ani, pentru mine să știu adânc în inima mea că sunt exact cum m-am creat și a vrut Dumnezeu. Și pentru asta sunt pur și simplu mulțumită. So that is Green Horses on the Walls, the title that graces the book. I should also mention that this photograph is of my grandparents and great uncle walking through Cheesemiju Park in the late 1930s. So it's a family photograph. So next up, we're going to dive into communism. This is the only prose poem in the book. It is about my family history and what communism means to me. Opening the orange envelope. My veterinarian grandfather was arrested while ice skating on the open-air rink in Galați in southeastern Romania in 1948 and disappeared to internment in Bucharest. Later, my pharmacist's grandmother was picked up on her way to the train station in the early 1950s. Both were only guilty of being educated peasants and not members of the Communist Party. Both were tortured and interrogated. And both told their children that nothing had happened. But my father knew better than that. When my father left Romania in 1969 and decided to stay in the US, he and his family knew what would happen. He became an enemy of the state. The harassment began full force on both sides of the Atlantic. The Securitate terrorized my family in Galați and my parents in the States. What does this terror look like? Imagine no conversation being secret. Don't talk or they'll hear you, was the constant refrain in my grandparents' apartment. Imagine being followed everywhere, walking down the street, going to the grocery store, looking out the window from your home and someone is standing there in a trench coat smoking, watching you. A secret police officer barging in on you while you are taking a bath and interrogating you in the tub, naked. Worrying that everyone you talk to is an informant, because they probably are. This lasted for my family for 20 years until the fall of communism. My most vivid childhood memories from the 80s are not of listening to Jem or playing with Barbie, but rather they are of my parents routinely sitting us down in the middle of our house in North Carolina and directing us on the assembly line, putting together packages for our relatives in Romania. We prepared them with so much care, stacking the blocks of soap, old t-shirts, coveted blue jeans, and cartons of cigarettes. My father showed us who these packages were going to with black and white photographs he pulled out of an orange envelope. When he was sleeping or out of the house, I would regularly sneak into his home office upstairs and open the orange envelope and peek into a world forbidden to me. I just found out from my cousin, the model, who I only knew as a photograph for so long, that our grandfather had built a special bed for himself above the front door so that when the Securitate would barge in the middle of the night, they wouldn't see him and arrest him. She also told me that our grandmother, the pharmacist, had self-medicated from her pharmacy for decades, trying to control her anxiety induced by this relentless terror. Morella also introduced me to the concept of inherited trauma and the studies done on grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. It all makes sense now. My great uncle was on the canal for over a decade, Romania's most notorious labor camp. He returned to his wife, who had waited for him in his village, crazy, and he died shortly thereafter. Morella left her promising modeling career in Bucharest to be a psychiatric nurse in London. And I am Romanian American who grew up in comfortable North Carolina. I know that the word communism means many things to many people, but this is what it means to me. So now we're on to Rooks's favorite poem, that in its day was a crowd pleaser. Now it's in print. A Tricky Diaspora. And I just want to put this out there. Please, this is in the spirit of of humor and being able to laugh at ourselves. Okay, A Tricky Diaspora. I'm from a tricky diaspora, an assimilate quick diaspora, a red lipstick, high heels, and skinny perfume cigarettes diaspora. The only thing we are known for is not exactly our history. Dracula diaspora. Maybe that's why we always say we're from anywhere than we actually are from. Je suis à Paris. I can't actually hear the parental accent diaspora. My siblings cannot pronounce our family name correctly diaspora. A too suspicious yet too trusting diaspora. A shh, don't talk or they'll hear you diaspora. A country you've never heard of diaspora. I silently understand 8 languages diaspora. A no pressure to get married ever diaspora. A sex is healthy and beautiful diaspora. And any race is more beautiful than Caucasian diaspora, unless you're Roma Gypsy diaspora. A politically totally confused diaspora. A Reagan Realpolitik diaspora. So you're telling me that all healthcare isn't free diaspora? All education always on full scholarship diaspora. What? You don't already have 2 graduate degrees? Doctor. A knowing the world map diaspora. A spiritual but not religious diaspora. And never knowing your grandparents diaspora. A family history so painful that you just never talk about it diaspora. A rejoicing through tears when your country's dictator is assassinated diaspora. A real appreciation for a pair of blue jeans diaspora. A not so ancient history of wearing denim on denim diaspora. A deep understanding of the origins of rock and roll diaspora. Ce frumoasă țară e România? Is it? Dar în SUA avem un viitor. You don't have to be from our diaspora to have heard that one before. And finally, Bucharest, which is the perfect complement to Rooks and what she will share to close off this poetry reading period. So, if you can't tell, I'm a big fan of Bucharest. Bucharest, it's the little things. Flower shops on every corner, for hello, for goodbye, for welcome, for your welcome, for bine ați venit, for it's an absolute pleasure, and for thank you, for I love you. It's gift bags and wrapping paper at every grocery checkout. It's the fumes of gasoline lingering amidst the general smell of pollution, mixed with cigarettes, mixed with cigars, mixed with pure, sweet, and delicious BO, all blanketed with the strongest perfume from Paris. It's walking on the street at night with no fear of harassment or someone revealing a firearm. It's being a woman in all one's femininity and that being okay. It's being a man who loves and hugs and that being okay. It's having coffee with your closest friend and actually having a conversation. It's a world with no agenda because all roads lead to nowhere anyway. That's why people escape to where you came from. It's parks full of the elderly spending afternoons watching grandchildren play. It's trams, buses, cars, motorcycles, mopeds, bicycles, and the metro. It's streets that you would rather just walk because every piazza leads you to a place you'd like to be. It's a city of theaters, of universities, of libraries, of the most infamous nightclubs in Europe, in a language that is secret because all Romanians speak English fluently anyway. It's private, like Eastern Christian Orthodoxy, where the priests conduct the entire liturgy behind an ornate golden painted gate. That private sacred space that the packed church of parishioners will never get to see. Private, like how we don't talk about the past. It's days spent wandering, it's nights spent dreaming. It's a place where things just happen. Dynamic, immediate, and perpetually young. It's underground, brought to light, and it's anyone's native, expat, diaspora's playground. Thank you. Brooks, it's yours now.
Thank you, Cristina. It's amazing to see Bucharest through your eyes, and I'm sure that many of the things that you mentioned in your poem we feel in a different way, or we don't observe as being the small gifts of living in Bucharest, especially not being threatened by a gun, you know. So I will start reading my poem saying that another coincidence is that my poem or my poetic tourist guide in about US starts really in Colorado, very close to the place where you are now. This is one of the reasons why I said yes to your proposal. Everything starts on the continental divide. There, on the ridges, on the steep cliffs, on the spinal cord of the continent, where rivers meet to decide whether to drain into the Pacific or into the Atlantic, where people meet to debate whether to occupy Wall Street or to occupy Silicon Valley. West Coast versus East Coast, the eternal dilemma. Everything starts there, on a little place called Loveland, where the rocks kiss the sky. Let's rock, Rocky Mountains. Stay warm, stay calm. Breathe in, breathe out. Practice hot yoga in a fancy studio with huge windows facing a busy road. Inside it's peace. Say namaste. Outside there are cars and trucks biting the road like huge angry dogs. Inside the cars, kids playing Angry Birds. Inside the trucks, the drivers, big angry men talking about a revolution. Guns. The pastor has his arm covered with tattoos. The pastor's wife has a Winchester under her bed. In a country where bad people have guns, good people must have guns too, she says, and she smiles. It's her Sunday smile, the peaceful smile after the Mass. If Adam had a rifle, Eve must have had a gun. Enter a social network. Come on, this is the place where we're all mixed up. Put your face on Facebook. Read the book. The end of the world is upon us. Pretty soon it will all turn to dust. We need to keep close, to stay in touch. All together now, the midwives of the Midwest, the poor fat people at Walmart, and the obscenely rich ones, the ones who collect art, the dykes and the Mormons, the fervent Catholics, and those whose eyes are oblique, the florists of Florida, the Jews of Manhattan, the post-protest Protestants, the Southerners all tied up in the Bible Belt. The Yankees, you Yankees, go home. The breadwinners and the breadwinnerettes, the gringos and the Chicanos, the Americans and the Puerto Ricanos, all playing in a West Side Story with happy end. The Black people getting high on merchandise on Black Friday, the white people getting high on white powder, the white collars and the rednecks. The few Native Americans forgotten in scattered reservations, and the army of anthropologists studying them, all united in a colorblind society. America, the land of plenty. I wanted to come, I was fingerprinted, I was given a visa and a home, a pair of new eyes. The airports greeted me with shrimps and grits, with biscuits and gravy. The interstates laid at my feet like striped happy puppies, waiting to be cuddled by my estranged hands. The oceans washed my feet, the skies washed my brains. The churches rang their bells for me, only for me. The universities opened their door just because I knew how to make words dance. America, don't be shy. You just love being seen through my eyes. Oh girl, how you make me wonder. I flied you in friend smiles, I walked you in blocks. I browsed you in grids, always looking for the center. First Street, Second Street, Third Street, 100 pairs of shoes I broke, one for each time our eyes locked. One for each time you hit me with a feeling I knew will stay there forever. You, a witch. Me, just another Dorothy lost on the yellow brick road. America, go on Craigslist. You'll find a message from me at Missed Connections. It reads like this. I'm sure you've noticed me around. I walk by you every day for a while now. Prejudices melting step by step. Ladies and gents, thank you for hearing our poetry. Thank you for listening all the things that were said about Cristina's intellectual book. And hopefully we have a little time for some questions.
Camelia, do you see any questions in the comments?
Well, apart from many people congratulating you on the publication of the books, I don't see. And another suggestion that we actually should translate the book into Romanian. But I'm sure there are other questions that we got on other means of communication.
Well,
so
if I may,
I'm wondering. Sorry?
I was just going to say, I want to share.
I'm wondering. You go first.
No, I just want to say that Rooks, I love that poem so much. And I remember when you read it to me, we just were walking through Bloomington and you sat me down on the curb in this residential neighborhood and read the entire poem to me. So I wanted to share that because, you know, sometimes in life you have those kind of memories. And so thank you so much. And please go ahead, Camelia. What were you going to say?
In this sense, I want to know what your plans are in terms of artistic creation. What are you working on now?
Thank you so much. So there are two big announcements. The first is that I wrote a new play this year, which is a personal triumph because I had gotten to the point with my writing that I didn't know if I could continue to write plays. Plays were the first genre that I would write in. So I was asked to write a play for this anthology, Voices on the Move, about the refugee and immigrant experience, a volume edited by Dominica Radulescu and Roxana Kazan, who are very well-known feminist female authors in the Romanian diaspora here in the States. And my play, Je suis juriste, is specifically about my father's journey coming from Galatz and creating a life in the United States. And so it means a lot to me because I've always wanted to tell his story, and I'm hopeful that now that it's out there as a play, I already have dreams of staging it on Zoom in the spring, for example, and I've talked to a filmmaker about maybe doing a little documentary about his story. So like that kind of, that's on my radar, something I want to follow through on. And the book is available on Amazon with many of other wonderful contributions. And then the big announcement is that the Romanian Cultural Institute of New York reached out to Bucharest Inside the Beltway and invited us to partner with them on a literary series that starts on Tuesday. So for the next 6 weeks, we are working together, both BIB and rtures in New York, producing this series of events. They are videos of readings of very prominent, again, both Dominica and Roxana, who edited this volume. They are invited poets and playwrights as part of the series. It's going to be Romanian women voices in North America. That's the title, is something like this. And each Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, US, will be broadcast to Romanian women authors and their work. So this is a huge deal for Rooks and my baby Bucharest Inside the Beltway, because this is the most official thing we've been invited to be a part of. So I'm very excited about it.
Well, people are already writing that they can't wait for the literary series. So it's going to be a success, apparently. And Ruxandra, there's a question for you. Where is it available? Your writings, how can people get access to it?
So that could be another announcement. I only have one published book, which is called Oracle, but the tirage is already out. So I should think about
A second print run.
Yes. And my dream is to start working on my book about my American experience, and hopefully this poem will be part of this book. So for the moment, it's not available anywhere, but it will be maybe next year. By that time, we will have another book launch. Yeah,
that's great. And yeah, the congratulations keep coming. So I think everybody was really happy to listen to Cristina's book launch. One last question before like shutting myself up. Cristina, what role do you think your cultural heritage, this complicated Romanian American background that you share, what's his role in your creation? What's his role in your professional life, in the life of the historian Cristina Bejan, and what's its role in your poetry writing?
So I believe that writing, first of all, I believe that all writing is creative writing. So, you know, even
Definitely.
academic writing, yeah. I believe that it's a process of self-discovery. So for me, writing is, you know, it's an endeavor to get to know myself and discover, basically to figure myself out. And so the question of my identity, you know, as I mentioned, growing up in the 80s and not being allowed to have a connection to Romania, and that combined with having an immigrant parent, I was very aware that something was missing when I was during those formative years. And I felt like I didn't know part of me. And So then I honestly, when I look back, the rest of my life has been a search for that part of me. And a bit, like I said, writing being an act of self-discovery. And I've tried to discover that part of myself through writing. And there's a line in the final poem in the volume, definitely the most difficult poem to read in Green Horses, that Romanian is, at least I could retreat into Romanian as a way to basically like be with myself, because something really devastating had happened to me. And I found a refuge in the Romanian, in not just the language, but my Romanian identity. So.
How do you define among all these professional and creative projects that you have? You're a writer, you're a poet, you're a historian, you're an actress. I promise it's the last question.
That's another way that the members of Criterion continue to inspire me, because even those who are famous for being specialists, such as Eliade, he was a playwright, he was a novelist, right? And he was writing articles in newspapers. And so in the United States, there is this rat race pressure to specialize, and I've gotten to the point in my life where I'm over it. I'm just gonna be me, okay? And I find inspiration from the Criterionists, who were all the things. And so to look for words to describe all the things, I would suggest at this moment, but of course these are ever evolving. I'm not gonna just stop at the three I'm gonna share right now. I am an artist, because that is an umbrella where you can put a lot of poetry, theater, acting, all those things. Educator, teacher, writing history, and then activist, because I hesitate to be labeling myself activist everywhere, because I believe that we all should be activists for, justice, and use the platforms that we have to be vocal about, improving our world. So I would say those three at the moment: artist, educator, and activist. And I know that was a very long answer, so thank you, Camelia.
Thank you, both of you. It's been a great opportunity to see you again, even online. And Cristina, once more, thank you for these two great books. And as I said, I'm waiting for them in Romanian translation. Ruxandra?
Again, congratulations, Cristina, and I'm really happy for you. And Camelia, you're also an inspiration, and it's so great to see women that are there standing for being there for other women in their research and in their creative endeavor. I think that this is really that what the intellectual world needs most is generosity. And for me, tonight was a celebration of generosity, and I was happy to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Ruxandra. We're waiting for your book launch soon, since the PhD is also done. Let's announce that too. And thank you once more for inviting me to this event. It's been a pleasure, as always, when I meet the two of you. And since there are no more questions, unfortunately, although I'm sure the three of us could continue chatting as we usually do, probably we should stop here, at least for the public.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care.
Rock the world, ladies.